Welcome to Arizona Historical Society's Ask the Author series. Today, I'm very happy to be part of this program with Dr. Kara McCormack, searching for Wyatt Earp in Anatolia. And I have a short introduction here, and then I'm going to hand it over to Dr. McCormack, and she's going to tell us all about her fantastic article and her amazing research. I am Dr. Laura Key. I'm the managing editor of the Journal of Arizona History and also the AHS Research Fellowship Program Coordinator, having people come to our amazing archives and research with us. And speaking of amazing research, I'm with Jen Mary, who is an amazing archivist and historian who is responsible for helping us with the research and picking out images, and we couldn't do the journal without archivists like Jen.
Thank you.
Just a couple of reminders. We want, please give us some questions for Dr. McCormack. Just use the Q&A feature that's at the bottom of your screen for comments and questions. Just put it in there, and Jen and I will monitor it through the presentation, and then we'll get to your questions and answers at the end of the event. We usually like to leave 15-20 minutes or so at the end. This event is being recorded, and it'll be available on our YouTube channel, and a link will be sent out to everybody who registered. So even if people registered, they couldn't come today, something happened, they will still be able to see this program. If you enjoy this program, please consider becoming a member at our website, azhs.org/membership. Help us fulfill our mission, which is connecting people through the power of Arizona's history. The Arizona Historical Society is a nonprofit organization and state agency established in 1864. We have 4 museums throughout the state, so please come visit one of them. It's getting nice in Yuma now, so now you really want to. We collect, preserve, and tell the story of Arizona's past through museum exhibitions, libraries, archives, historic sites, educational programs like the one today, and the Journal of Arizona History. Stay connected, become a member. Like I said, it's really easy to become a member. It's a really great deal, by the way. You get sign up for our email list, follow us on social media. We're available on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. And my favorite, order a license plate, our monsoon license plate, as you see in the corner there. And since our monsoon is stretching itself into September, it rained yesterday here, at least in Tucson. So you can request that at the Arizona Department of Motor Vehicles. And for everything else, our website, azhs.org. As you can see, we are on our last 2 Ask the Author series. For our next one is November 30th, so right after Thanksgiving. Dr. Will Stoudemeyer is going to talk about his upcoming article, and this one is at 12 o'clock, so a nice lunchtime. Thought we'd switch around the times a little bit for y'all. All right, and now I'm going to introduce Dr. McCormack. Dr. Kara McCormack received her PhD in American Studies from the University of New Mexico. Since then, she has been a lecturer in humanities and a Thinking Matters Fellow at Stanford University, a visiting lecturer at Tufts University, and a scholar in residence at the Center for Regional Studies at the University of New Mexico. She is currently an assistant professor in American Culture and Literature at Bilkent University in Ankara, Turkey. Her research focuses on cultural studies, popular cultural, U.S. history, cultural memory, and film studies, with an emphasis on the U.S. West and science dystopian fiction. I am really excited for her to be here, and I want to thank her for taking time out of her day across the world to join us here in Arizona. Dr. McCormack, it's all you. I'm going to turn off my camera, but if you need me, I'm still here and I'm monitoring questions.
Great. Thank you so much. My cats are currently fighting.
Because they love a camera.
Wow. Geez. Okay. Let me share my screen. Can you see that?
Perfect.
Yes, we're good.
Yeah, great. Excellent.
What a beautiful
okay.
view.
Hi, everyone. Yes, this is Anatolia. This is actually Hattusha, the ancient city of Hattusha from the ancient Hittite Empire. But thank you all for joining me today. Greetings from Turkey, from Ankara. I've been intrigued by the global circulation of the mythic West, or more specifically, the mythic Wyatt, Earp, and Tombstone for years now. And when I moved to Turkey, I searched for ways this legend and legendary region resonated with Turks. Just as they have all over the world, the people of Turkey have been consuming images of the imagined American West for decades, mostly from Sunday morning broadcasts of Western films on national television station TRT, making meaning from the blending of American Western culture with their own. I first heard about TRT's broadcasts of American Westerns, or also Italian Westerns, from my students. As Dr. Key stated in the introduction, I am a professor of American culture at Bilkent University in Ankara, and the students in my Imagining the American West class mentioned that their families had watched Western films on Sunday mornings for years. These discussions led to further exploration of the ways Turks have engaged with the culture and history of the United States through images of the American West. While in some ways Turkey's relationship with the American West and the Western is strongly tied to attitudes about the United States, Turkish consumption of Western images, whether produced in the United States or in Turkey, is decidedly Turkish. Embedded in the consumption of these images is a Turkish national pride that allows for the expression of the dualism of US-Turkish relations, one that reveals both a reverence for and a strong aversion toward American history, culture, and politics. While the consumption of American Westerns constitutes both admiration and critique of American national ideals, Turkish Westerns tend to unequivocally celebrate Turkish culture. In other words, images of the West are important to Turks, both in the ways they imagine the United States and in the ways they define themselves. So today I'm going to talk to you about the American West and the Turkish imagination. Specifically, I'm discussing how the West as a global mythic site has been transformed and recontextualized into a local expression of Turkish national identity. The essay I wrote for the Journal of Arizona History is divided into 3 sections, and so will this talk. First, some conversations with Westerns loving Turks, conducted mostly by my former students with their parents and grandparents. Second, a textual analysis of the 2010 Turkish comedy Western, Yaşibatı. And third, notes from my observations at the Western-themed tourist attraction, Kansas City, which caters to Turks in towns like Tombstone. What I hope this essay demonstrates is how the global mythic West reflects a diversity of beliefs and traditions for those who might have never called the United States home, but who find opportunity for connection to its symbolic expression. The film, The Western Town, and the conversations all similarly reveal an interest in and enthusiasm for the iconography of America's Western past, conflicting and shifting thoughts about American history and culture, particularly in relation to violence, whiteness, and masculinity, ambivalence over the process of Westernization, and intense pride in Turkish tradition. I'm stopping for just a moment. It occurred to me that I don't have my Ethernet cable connected, so hopefully the Wi-Fi will work out. You can send me a message if I somehow get frozen. We'll hope for the best. So to get at the ways Turks have read American Westerns and made use of the imagery of the American West, I start with conversations with Westerns loving Turks who had watched American Westerns on TRT when they were growing up in the 1980s. The group's reminiscences remind us of the complex ways many Turks understand American life, as well as the ways the West is recontextualized and retooled to make sense in a Turkish context. As children and young adults of the 1980s, Turks did not have a lot of viewing options on Turkish television, and watching American Westerns on Sunday mornings generally became a family affair. Omar started watching Westerns when he was about 10 or 12 years old, quote, with all of my family members, since it was like a weekly designated activity in which all family members, no matter age or gender, would sit in front of one TV at one specific hour and day for Western screenings. Mehmet mentions that he and his family watched Westerns on TRT at breakfast time. Similarly, Felice says that, quote, after a good Sunday breakfast, everyone in my family would get their cup of tea and sit in front of the TV and watch them. We sometimes made desserts before the new episode started because Turkish people cannot let tea suffer from being without a dessert. As Felice's comment about Turkish tea and cultural expectations about food pairings implies, these gatherings around television sets by Turkish families throughout the 1980s and into the 90s became seamless fusions of Turkish and American culture. Sabahattin also watched Westerns on TRT with his family. He directly connects his love for American Westerns to reminiscences about his life as a boy in rural Muş in eastern Turkey. He says, I like Westerns because of a deep longing I had for my youth. To elaborate, when I started to watch Westerns, I was newly migrated to the Aegean coastal city of Izmir from Muş, and the place I had lived back in Muş was fully rural. I was literally living in a village over a prairie. Also, since we had no cars or roads, I was riding horses to travel, as my father had been doing throughout my youth. In the city of Izmir, I had no chance to ride a horse or wander through rural lands. So I was feeling fully restricted. Westerns presented me with what I had longed for, so they fulfilled an important gap I sought to fill. Omar connects the notion of unity, which he sees as undergirding American Westerns, specifically to the values of Turkish culture. I think the popularity in the 1980s, he says, was about how Westerns are fundamentally upholding the profound value of being or staying as a community while embracing communal norms and values accordingly. In my opinion, this kind of desire for communal unity was like what had been needed for the 80s in Turkey, since the country was full of socio-political and socioeconomic turbulences throughout the years Westerns became popular. Rather than reading American Westerns as being about rugged individualism and the lone cowboy, Omar recontextualizes these films to see them as upholding the traditional Turkish value of community, particularly, as he says, at a time when this idea was most needed, a time of unrest in the 1980s. There's also a strong reaction to the ways Native peoples are portrayed and treated in these Hollywood productions. Sabahattin admits that Westerns, quote, were proving my learnings over Natives and marginalization. Cihan says that, quote, the good cowboys were like idols, but most of the Turkish audiences were angry at the representations of Native people. Attila states, quote, one thing I did not like was that Native Americans were shown as the bad guys, although the cowboys were actually the bad ones. To him, these films, quote, showed us that white Americans can go anywhere, thinking that they're the rightful owners of the place and oppress everyone there. Özlem agrees, quote, I don't know much about American politics, but brutality towards Native Americans must be a problem there. The thoughts and experiences conveyed through these conversations demonstrate not only how the West has been imagined for decades, but also the ways American Westerns have been recontextualized and incorporated into Turkish life, a way to connect with and celebrate family and both American and Turkish traditions. These conversations also reveal how these films allow for a critique of American culture, most notably in relation to racialized violence. As the relationship between the US and Turkey has ebbed and flowed, American Westerns have gone in and out of favor. At the same time, Turkish Westerns contribute to a discourse of ambivalence about the United States and of celebration around Turkish history and life that springs from the themes and tropes of the American West. So in addition to these conversations, I also analyzed for the Journal of Arizona History article, a contemporary Turkish Western, Yaşubata, which loosely translates to Mild West, which was released in 2010, to get at the ways the tropes of the American Western have been recontextualized in Turkish popular culture and what these recontextualizations express. Yaşubata gives us further insight into the ambivalence many Turks hold toward the United States while simultaneously celebrating Turkish culture and tradition. It follows the trials and travails of two Ottoman special agents, Lemi and Aziz, as they travel through the late 19th century American West on their way to deliver a gift of a large diamond from the Ottoman Sultan to the US president. While a comedy set in the American West, the film has as much to say about Turkey as it does about the history and culture of the United States. By both celebrating and castigating the West of the film and America by default, it wavers on the influences of America on Turkish culture. It also reflects what many of the Westerns loving Turks in the previous section expressed when discussing both their adoration and disdain for American Westerns, and by extension, the United States itself. There are many moments in Yashibacha that demonstrate an acute ambivalence or even outright hostility toward the American West come America as at once progressive and uncivilized, particularly when compared to the Ottomans who have journeyed there. Even the less refined Secret Service agent Aziz, on the right here, finds himself peering down his nose at the lack of sophistication displayed by Westerners throughout their journey. We see a glimpse of this directly after our friends are given the task of bringing the diamond necklace from the Sultan to the US president. After crossing Europe and the ocean from Istanbul, we cut to Aziz and Lemmy in a stagecoach riding through the American West on their way to Washington, D.C. We meet a married couple who are traveling in the coach with them. Upon hearing that the travelers are from Istanbul, the American husband, Jack, asks, quote, "You ride camels, don't you?" To which Aziz responds, "Yes, every time, always camels, camels everywhere." Then he says in Turkish to his companion, "They always say that, it's all they know." Aziz is clearly ridiculing the ignorance of Americans about cultures outside of their own. And while Jack is asking questions based on stereotypes, his wife's revealing clothing and flirtatious behavior are presented as representations of the vulgarity with which Western women, particularly American women, comport themselves. Suddenly, the coach is held up by 6 bandits on horseback, led by outlaw Johnny Lesh. Mayhem ensues as Aziz and Lemmy attempt to keep the large diamond gift protected from the brutish marauders. Lemmy hides the diamond under his fez, and it is easily found by one of the gunmen. As the thief removes the fez and takes the diamond, he also slices off Lemmy's mustache. This moment in the film is interestingly loaded. Both the red fez and the mustache are political and cultural symbols of Turkish history, masculinity, and power. The red fez was popular during the Ottoman era, particularly when, in the early 19th century, Sultan Mahmud II ordered the fez be worn as a modern alternative to the turban. The fez became such a symbol of Ottoman affiliation that it was banned in 1925 by Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, founding father of the Republic of Turkey, as part of his modernizing reforms. The mustache is equally symbolic and, in fact, more contemporary as a political and cultural signifier in Turkey. Connected in many ways to the Ottoman past, particularly in association with modernization programs, the mustache still makes a statement today. As historian Avner Wishnitzer demonstrates, full facial hair throughout the Ottoman era had been the domain of the older generation, while mustaches were associated with Ottoman youth. Mustaches became more popular in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, particularly for those born after 1870. Following the 1908 Young Turks Revolution, the mustache became even more popular as, quote, young mustached people began to climb the military and civilian hierarchies, and for the first time, people in the highest positions in the state mechanism were not bearded. Not only were mustached individuals more powerful, thanks to the exponential expansion in the sphere of publication following the revolution, they were more visible as well. While its popularity has ebbed and flowed in Turkish society, the power of the mustache as a signifier of authority and masculinity has remained. As Wall Street Journal staff reporter Hugh Pope writes, quote, "If there's one thing that symbolizes manhood of a Turk, it's his mustache." But the mustache is also seen as a clear indication of political affiliation. Pope delineates the meaning of the mustache in political and religious terms. Quote, "Mustaches signal the difference between leftist, bushy, and rightist, drooping to the chin, between Sunni Muslim, clipped, and Alevi Muslim, curling into the mouth." In fact, in the political tumult of the 1970s and 1980s, mustaches were such a strong indication of political leaning that civil servants were required to be clean-shaven. Interestingly, to be clean-shaven has for decades been a political statement of solidarity with the secular westernizing elite that founded the Republic in 1923. Ataturk famously shaved his own mustache once the Republic of Turkey was established. The signifying power of the mustache has an analog in the American West and is particularly associated with famous lawman Wyatt Earp and the many men who have portrayed him in Westerns throughout the 20th century, perhaps most notably Kurt Russell in the film Tombstone. As in Turkey, mustaches in the United States have also signified masculinity, power, and politics, as well as the relationship between the individual and society. According to gender historian Christopher Oldstone Moore, the mustache, quote, the preeminent form of facial hair in the United States, distinguished between two elemental masculine types, sociable and autonomous. According to the 20th century gender code, a clean-shaven man's virtue was his commitment to his male peers and to local, national, or corporate institutions. The mustached man, by contrast, was much more his own man, a patriarch, authority figure, or free agent who was able to play by his own rules. Frederick Jackson Turner once wrote that the American frontier had promoted a democracy, quote, strong in selfishness and individualism, intolerant of administrative experience and education, and pressing individual liberty beyond its bounds. Just as Oldstone Moore argues about the mustache, folklorist and oral historian Modi C. Boatwright contends that the tendency of the frontier myth itself was, quote, antisocial. It makes sense then that the mustache, a symbol of rugged individualism and masculinity, has come to be so strongly associated with the mythical American cowboy. Masculinity, individual freedom, and power were deeply connected in late 19th century United States. The same is true for the late Ottoman era, as well as contemporary Turkey. If the mustache symbolizes masculinity and power, its violent yet cavalier removal from Lemmy's face by American bandits in Yashibata is an act of humiliation. It also offers further commentary on the total disregard Westerners, or Americans, have had for Turkish culture and the emasculation of Turkey through the process of Westernization. Clearly, the mustache is a gendered symbol, and it is used throughout Yashibata to exteriorize the gendered differences between both the manly and the effeminate, and men and women. Cultural historian Sarah Gold McBride argues that, quote, between the 1850s and the early 1900s, men credited mustaches, side whiskers, and especially beards with holding a litany of powers, maintaining or amplifying health, conveying dignity and respect, conferring masculinity, and even justifying the natural rule of men over women. In the film, recently devitalized and reluctantly westernized Lemmy tells Aziz that the fiercely independent, sharpshooting, and soon-to-be love interest Suzanne, a Western and westernized woman whom our friends meet during her target practice in the woods, is, quote, like a man, and insists that she is a lesbian. Continual reference to the hair above her lip as a mustache draws an interesting juxtaposition between her and Lemmy in terms of gender expectations. Additionally, while Aziz falls instantly for Suzanne, her mustache is a constant concern. The intolerable and intolerant sheriff of the aptly named Cannonball, Ohio, winces about Suzanne not being a real lady. Quote, she has more of a mustache than I do, he scoffs. And even when Aziz and Suzanne are professing their love for each other, Suzanne's facial hair comes into the conversation. I like your mustache, Suzanne tells Aziz. I like yours too, he responds. A few scenes later, Aziz is twisting sticky candy onto a stick, and a piece gets stuck on Suzanne's upper lip. He pulls, and with the candy comes Suzanne's facial hair. Your mustache is gone, he says. How does it look, she asks. Good. The earrings look good on you too, he replies, commending her on the restoration of her femininity and her metaphorical distance from the American West and Western culture more generally. Though Suzanne was classified earlier in the narrative as one of, quote, the things that are good from the West, she may have taken her role as Western woman too far. The restoration of her femininity and symbolic separation from the American West is further hit home in one of the final scenes when she is for the first time wearing a dress and accepting a proposal of marriage from Aziz. The continual mention of and reference to mustaches speaks to their significance to Turks, specifically in relation to the disagreeable results of Westernization and to the culture and politics of the United States. While Western films may be the most widely consumed representations of the West, both those from Hollywood and those produced in other nations, the Old West is also engaged by the public in different ways, including through historical Western towns like Tombstone, Arizona, and Western-themed attractions and amusement parks in places around the world. Western-themed attractions and amusement parks have been built from England to Japan, offering a third dimension to celluloid imaginings of the American West. These towns and parks allow travelers to live out their wild Western fantasies in much the same way Tombstone does for its visitors. Very different from Western towns and parks in the United States, these cowboy towns in Europe and elsewhere become hybrids, celebrating both some version of the American West and the cultures of their own regions. The same is true for the Turkish Western-themed town about an hour southwest of Istanbul, known as Arkansas City. Arkansas City is tucked away in the mountains high above the Marmara Sea, offering a very different view from the actual West, but an experience that visitors describe as, quote, amazing, incredible, and just as we expected, nonetheless. The attraction was opened in 2017 by tourism professional Erkan Erdem after a trip to Las Vegas, Nevada, and a visit to Calico, an old silver mining town in California. Seeing how popular a destination Calico was for tourists, Erdem wanted to do the same in Turkey. He spent many years engaging with the American West by visiting, scouring the internet, and watching Western movies. The name Arkansas City is a play on the name Arkansas, combined with his own name, demonstrating his deep and personal investment in the place. He also believes that Arkansas City is one of only 2 such towns in the world, the other being Calico, California, the ghost town he visited a decade ago and served as inspiration for his vision. As seems to be the case with other Western-themed attractions around the world, and despite the claim on its website that, quote, everything is real, the question of authenticity at Arkansas City has less to do with historical accuracy and more to do with how closely it aligns with the Western films that animate it. Indeed, Erdem's vision of the Wild West comes from his considerable engagement with American Western films, 186 by his own count, and from how the West is understood in the Turkish imagination. In this way, Arkansas City, just like its name, is an amalgam of the imagined West and Turkish culture, where cowboy performances and dusty old American curios mingle seamlessly with Turkish cuisine, Turkish anthems, and artifacts of the establishment of the Turkish Republic. Of course, I had to experience the Western-themed town for myself, so 2 friends and I made the 3-hour journey from Ankara to Kara McCormack in July of 2021. The town is made up of 2-dimensional facades built to look like old Western structures. It's like a movie set. You cannot enter the buildings, though visitors can and do take many photographs outside. The buildings are identified with iconic Western labels, in iconic Western script: a bank, a sheriff's office, and a jail, a saloon, a general store, and a post office, all constructed from distressed 10-inch wood planks. The ground is dust and dirt, just what one might expect when going to a place like Tombstone in 1881. Johnny Cash and Dolly Parton blast from the loudspeakers as staff welcome us upon entry. We are later greeted by Erdem, who proudly escorts us from room to room in the hotel, restaurant, and entertainment facility, identifying the various artifacts with which he has decorated the place to give the appearance of an 1880s American Western town. As Erdem explains, this is a business, of course, but he continually tells us that he doesn't do it for profit, but for the delight of it. He loves dressing in his cowboy outfit, which he admits he purchased from an online biker shop, and he has a true passion for the pageantry. That's him in the center photo there. He even mentions that when he puts on the cowboy outfit, his manner of walking changes, and he, quote, feels like John Wayne. He says he's doing this to make his guests happy, an emotion fully on display the next day when we see Erdem and his staff in action, performing for visitors after they've come for a large traditional Turkish breakfast. After breakfast comes the main event. Erdem swaggers out in his cowboy outfit, guns blazing, music from Sergio Leone's The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and the theme from The Magnificent Seven blasting on the speakers. Erdem welcomes his audience, then asks for volunteers to perform in the play, which involves the sheriff, played by Erdem, escorting two outlaws he has recently arrested to the jail. But the outlaws escape and attempt to hold up the bank instead. A shootout takes place and one of the outlaws ends up dead while the other finds himself in the town jail to await justice. The audience clearly appreciates the performances, laughing and cheering throughout. The music chosen and the cliches utilized clearly demonstrate the influence of Hollywood on Erdem's and his audience's perception of the American West of the 1880s. It doesn't seem like anyone believes this is an authentic and historical reenactment of what happened in the real Old West. Instead, it's meant to and is received as fully good-humored, if still exotic and exciting. After the show comes, at least for me, the most interesting moment of the entire afternoon. Erdem hands out Turkish flags to all the guests as the loudspeakers blast the Izmir March, an anthem honoring the triumph of Turkish troops led by Ataturk against the Greek army during the Turkish War for Independence in 1922. It's a very exciting moment as everyone sings along and dances and waves their flags. There's something about the spectacle of a group of Turks wearing cowboy outfits and hats in an American West themed town, singing one of the most celebratory songs of modern Turkey. The playing of the Izmir March is specifically and wholly a moment of Turkish pride of which the United States is not a part. Erdem tells us he used to pass out American flags, but his guests complained. Turkish flags are clearly much more fitting as Turks continually navigate the modern political climate and negotiate their modern Turkish identity in relation to the Western world. So my quest to find Wyatt Earp here in Anatolia, in that quest, I've discovered that Wyatt Earp, whether the historical figure or the popular culture construction, is not as much a part of Turkish imaginings of the American Old West as he is in other nations. None of the favorite Western stars mentioned in our conversations, Yul Brynner, John Wayne, Lee Van Cleef, and Clint Eastwood, ever played Earp in a film. Indeed, with its continual malleability and fluidity, the Old West in Turkey is much more transnational, with Sergio Leone's films figuring high on many Turks' list of favorite Westerns, and the Belgian comic book series Red Kit seen as early influences on Turks' love of the Western. The title of this talk is more about my own journey to Turkey and my ongoing quest to discover the meanings of the West globally. While I wasn't sure, I thought Turkey would be no different from the ways the American West makes sense to people around the world. And in many ways, that's true. Not only does the Anatolian landscape, as you can see, continually remind me of the American West, but the ideas and practices performed around the symbols of the Old West in spaces like Tombstone, Arizona, are clearly meaningful to people here in Turkey. Cultural studies scholar Masako Nochoji argues that, quote, American culture is deconstructed and recontextualized into the everyday experience of the people. She continues, quote, American popular culture is not the monopoly of Americans. It is a medium through which people around the world constantly reorganize their individual and collective identities. Clearly, the Old West resonates with Turks as it does for so many other people in other nations. But there's also something else going on. In his discussion of internationalizing the field of American studies, Robert Crows argues that, quote, studies of the way in which the United States has projected itself as a force affecting the lives of many across the globe explore the ways in which America's power is experienced and made sense of elsewhere. Many Americas arose in the process as so many constructions in the minds of people elsewhere trying to make sense of the forces that changed their lives. The concept of many Americas is fitting to this discussion, as Turks' engagement with and criticisms of the images of the American West demonstrate. All the conversations with Westerns watching Turks, the film Yashibata, and the Western-themed Arkansas City express a duality of sentiments that illustrate the ambivalence Turks feel toward American history, politics, and culture, particularly in relation to race and gender, as well as the way they feel about the processes of Westernization. What Arkansas City, Turkish Westerns, and Turks themselves all express are how the ideas and practices performed around the symbols of the Old West are clearly meaningful to people here. The American West and the Turkish imagination demonstrates how the mythic West offers Turks a sense of belonging and a sense of rebelliousness and enthusiasm and a way to feel connected to the history and culture of the United States and distance from and perhaps superior to it. But it also reveals an intense pride in Turkish tradition. In so many ways, the West is continually retooled, recontextualized, and incorporated into Turkish culture and history, while at the same time offering Turks the opportunity to envision and define themselves. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. What amazing pictures, by the way. And
yes, indeed.
My Wi-Fi is causing a little bit of issues, so I'm not going to turn on my video, but I'm here. And we got a question from an audience member, which is really good here. Dan Johnson asks, do you have any idea how TRT chose the films they chose? In other words, what Westerns have been especially influential in Turkey?
Well, it seems to me that the most talked about and most well-known Western in Turkey is The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which is interesting because we know that it's the third in the series of The Man with No Name, right. and yet it's seen as, you know, the best American Western. That's what it's often classified as. But also the Westerns of John Wayne were really popular. I don't know how TRT chose the Westerns that it aired throughout the last 40 years. But I do know so TRT had stopped showing these Westerns in 2018, in August of 2018. And then their secondary station, TRT2, started up again in March of 2019 with the film Cat Ballou. Again, I don't know how these films get chosen, but they are all, as far as I know, are all older films. They're not showing the newer American Westerns that have come out in the last, say, 20 years even.
That's amazing. Like, I guess I never would have thought about how history Hollywood films would be so popular and so ingrained in other cultures that are quite different than a Western culture. But, you know, after your article and your presentation here, I can see a lot of similarities, you know, and see how some would like, I don't know, the wildness or the independence that the West so often, you know, is portrayed, which kind of leads me to my first question. Your article harkens very much back to what historians call like this mythic West, that romanticized Old West, and Hollywood pushed in the 1940s, especially, like you said, the popularity of John Wayne movies with the shootouts and gunslingers. Why do you think that? What is there something specific that in Turkey or in other maybe European or Middle East nations clinged on to that made it so popular, or reproducible, I guess is the better word?
That's a big question, I feel like. I think you know, we could ask the same question about the United States and why the mythic West has had such a stranglehold on the ways that Americans understand the Western past. That the mythic American West, or even the tropes of the mythic West and the themes that we see in these films that have been utilized in other nations, often those nations are really commenting on their own histories and their own cultures. Many people know about the German author Karl May. He's maybe or widely considered the most popular, the most well-read German author of all time. He wrote Westerns about a German immigrant to the American West in the 1880s, and his like native sidekick, and their adventures throughout the American West. And he had never been to the American West, but he was widely well received in Germany. And many movies were based on his works. And then also when East and West Germany separated, East Germany sort of rejected the Karl May capitalist style of, and many seen as racist depictions of the American West, and produced a number of movies called Indiana Film, which featured Native heroes that were working against white interests in the as early as the 1820s. Some of those films are from, but depict. And so a lot of that has to do with the ways that Germans understand or understood themselves in relation to indigeneity and even, sort of rejection of Western values. And I think we can see that in these Turkish Westerns as well. And what's interesting, I wanted to also mention that not all, there have been a number of Turkish Westerns that I haven't explored yet. Many of them were produced in the 60s, 70s, and 80s that take place in the American West. But there's another movie that I actually wanted to include in this article, but it was getting too long, which is a movie called Once Upon a Time in Anatolia. And that is also from 2010. And it really relies on the themes of the Western, but it takes place in the Anatolian countryside. So that they sort of make use of those tropes and really sort of map them onto their own culture.
That's really cool. I especially like my favorite photo of the article is the audience waving the Turkish flags, because I think that just says so much about this cross. Here you are in an old Western American town with Turkish flags, and it's fascinating.
Indeed.
I think my co-host here has a question.
I think I can turn my video on, maybe. I don't know. I guess maybe not. So I read an article years ago about Disneyland Paris, and I thought it was really interesting that you mentioned Disneyland and how their franchise, I guess, for lack of a better word, just sort of has gone in other countries. And it's been a long time since I read the article, but I did just pull it up to see if I remembered correctly. And I think what he was arguing was that he was arguing the idea of globalization. So bringing an American theme or a Western theme to another country and sort of, like you said, adapting a little bit of their nationality to them. And one of his examples was McDonald's, and how McDonald's comes in and talks about, it's McDonald's, but they might serve beer and wine in Italy, or they might serve a different type of sandwich in another place, or like in Hawaii, they serve sushi, kinds of things like that. And I just thought it was interesting because he talks a lot about how it's economic and not necessarily ethnic, or kind of like what you're arguing. So I just wanted to see what you thought of that if you've read the article. It was by Jonathan Matuzitz.
I think that's
other articles.
I don't know the article. I do know about the ways that, like, sort of rodeos and the Wild West show at Disney Paris is received. It's maybe the most popular show at Disneyland in Paris, and I've seen images of it. I haven't been there, but I've seen images of it, and it's like a spectacular, like like Buffalo Bill's Wild West. And I think so there has been, as far as I know from my own research, I have a chapter in my book about this as well, but that these spaces, yes, they are trying to, obviously it's going, their hope is to make money. It's a business. One of the things about our Kansas City that was interesting was they didn't sell souvenirs. And so Erdem's claimed that he was doing this mostly for fun, that it wasn't about making money. That sort of gets, the evidence of that really is that he wasn't selling anything except for breakfast. Basically people came there for breakfast and a show. And that's very different from how I feel like any American Western theme town or any theme town would do it. But obviously, many places like Disney obviously are looking to make money. But the question then becomes, how do they make money? Why are they making money? And tapping into, yes, local traditions, whether that be food or notions about, you know, wide open spaces or that kind of thing, that when you're tapping into people's sort of ideological, you know, worldviews, that's what makes money, right? And so when you, as an American Studies scholar or as a cultural studies scholar, I'm looking at why that makes money, because I feel like, yes, of course they're trying to make money, but why is it working? And so that's really what I'm looking at here.
I think that is so interesting, and I'm looking forward to reading some more from you, because that was just fascinating.
Okay.
We know about, living in Arizona. I'm a native Arizonan, so we know all there is to know about Wyatt Earp, and and we get about Wyatt Earp all the time in the West, and everybody's fascinated with the West, but I think we sort of just ignore it because we're so used to it. It's been here my whole life, but honestly, I'm a native and I've never been to Tombstone. So, it's interesting. And I sort of came up with my own conclusion about that. My parents were much older. They moved here from the Midwest in the 60s. When they moved here, all the family came to visit, and they did Tombstone and Bisbee and all of that. And then I was kind of an oops baby a lot later, and they'd already done all that. I didn't get to go anywhere because they'd already been there, done that, all the touristy things, they'd been established here, so I have it's on my to-do list as an adult. I just haven't done it yet, but maybe when I retire, I don't know, but, and that's
fun. I've been there many times because I did my dissertation and then I wrote this book, and going there over and over, and then once you sort of are there many times, you feel much more comfortable talking to people, and it was such an eye-opening experience. I'm from Massachusetts, so
okay.
Doing this work on the American West and the sort of cultural components of the American West and the mythic West has been my life for 20 years. It's what I've done, and so I'm so grateful to be able to continue this work in Turkey, which who knew, really, right? And so here we are.
No, I think that's fantastic, because we just we get a lot of questions about the Southwest and Western from everywhere but Arizona. We have other countries, other states. We have a researcher that we work with quite a bit in France that is studying the American West, and that to me is super interesting, that there's just not a lot of American or Western scholars here in Arizona.
I will concur with that also as managing editor of the journal. So come research Arizona. We've got lots of good stuff here, and we need more research in Arizona and the West and how it fits into the Western idea and history. I have kind of a different question for you, Kara. What's your experience teaching as an American in Turkey? Like, what do your students think of studying American history and culture? And I'm sure you put a lot of your own research into your classes and everything, but I'm fascinated over this.
I don't know what else to say, but it's really great. So I teach an Intro to American Studies class, which is a required course for the program. And the students that I have are first years. And one of the things that I found when I first arrived, and still find really amazing, is how the students are so versed in American culture, however defined. It could be television shows on Netflix, it could be sports or social media or any of those things, even politics. These students are history. It's really amazing that how connected they are to American life, really. And so that was really eye-opening to me. And I'm also amazed at how well they speak English. they've been taking English for many years, and English and Turkish are, well, for me personally, Turkish is very difficult. So when these students are able to speak English so well and also write papers, it's very impressive. I teach a class on imagining the American West, and that class has been, I find, really interesting because the students don't necessarily take it because they are fans of the West or the Western. Unlike my sci-fi class, students who take that class are all interested in science fiction. But once they start like understanding the ways that I'm unpacking the significance of the mythic West, both to Americans and globally, they start to see it as a much more, I think, important class. At least that's been the feedback. And I really love seeing this transformation because, our first movie is Shane, then we watch The Searchers, and then we move through and we watch Smoke Signals and Brokeback Mountain. And, we're going to end this semester with the Book of Eli. And I find that, that sort of, they become much more interested in this concept of the mythic West as we go through. And that I find really satisfying. And perhaps in a way, students in the US wouldn't, because in the air, like Jen was saying, this sort of concept of the mythic West or the West is in the air already.
Right.
But here it's not. And so,
right.
A much different kind of appreciation for it.
Absolutely. And it's, I teach a class once in a while at Arizona about the Latin image on American film. And I always start off with Westerns, right? Always. And I try to pick ones that they might be interested in, right? So, Clint Eastwood or Two Mules for Sister Sarah, whatever. And most of them had never seen it. But one of the number one discussion posts is, I don't like Westerns. I think, and I think it's also more cognizant of like, I don't like the way they portray Native Americans. I don't like the way and mine focuses on, Mexicans and Mexican Americans, right? It's really interesting that, I guess, because even if they didn't visit Tombstone when they were young, they grew up with this Western ideal of Western movies and everything. And I have to get them to look at this Western a different way, right?
Right. That might even be more difficult than doing it from here.
Right. And they hate the Magnificent Seven. It's really interesting to me. Yes.
But one of the things that I find I sort of brush over in this talk. I write more about it in the article, but I feel like is desperately in need of unpacking is the depiction of Native Americans in the movie Yashibata, and the ways that there is a Native like a sort of an Indian dance type of thing at Arkansas City, which is problematic. But also in sort of this contrast, it's an interesting tension maybe, because the people that were part of these conversations that I had, who had been watching Westerns on TRT, all of them, not just three of them, all of them mentioned the ways that Native Americans are treated in these movies.
Wow.
And how they didn't like that, right? And so I find that in contrast, really, or a counter distinction to the ways that Native people have been portrayed in movies here or in real life. And so that's something that I would like to explore further and have more conversations with people about, because I think it's important to understand what is, how this sort of, it's almost a mythical Indian character. But in Yashibata, for example, the Native characters are much more complex and have backstories in ways that Native characters in American Westerns of the 1950s did not, but still problematic. So how does that happen? I'd really like to explore that further.
I agree. I found that fascinating. Go ahead, Jen.
No, I was going to say, Laura and I were kind of talking about this yesterday, and I would be curious to know. So you said that, so I'm kind of going to your article because I did get a chance to read it. But
Okay.
you said that some of your age group was older. So, and I would call, 60s, 70s, that you interviewed some of them. I would be curious, and I'm not sure if you have you interviewed any Americans of that same age group that did grow up with these Westerns? I would wonder, does their view of how Native Americans were treated in those movies differ from the same age group in Turkey? Because, a lot of that age group here in America still sort of doesn't see a problem with that. Not all of them, but there's a lot of them that just don't think there was anything wrong with that. And I'm just curious if it's an age thing or cultural or both or combination.
I have not had that conversation with Americans. Sort of my fascination with the American West started with my father. Again, from Massachusetts, having a real affinity for movies when he was a kid in the 1950s, television shows and movies that took place in the American West. And I think that his experience is of a very white working class Massachusetts Bostonian, kids perception, which was that there was not much of a problem here. And so I would be interested to know if that shifted, because he was a kid in the 1950s. Would that shift for people who were kids in the 1970s and 80s, who would be the same age group as the ones that are in this study? And so I, with sort of broadening understandings of different cultures and peoples, that the hope would be that would shift over time. So maybe
I think that
maybe that'll be my next project.
Perfect. And it's funny because my dad also grew up in the 50s. He's been gone for a long time, but I would love to know what he would have thought today. Absolutely, too. So that's what I was thinking as I was reading your article, is because he loved Roy Rogers, and Trigger the horse was his favorite. Those kinds of movies. And I just remember watching them as a child with him, and on Sunday afternoons usually. So the reruns, but yeah, so I think that would be just really interesting to see.
I love this idea. The thing that came through in these conversations that you're talking about now is this family dynamic of sitting around the TV with breakfast or with tea or with whatever it is, and watching as a family. And a number of the people mentioned how afterward they would go out and play cowboys, which is the same, I would argue, that our fathers did when they were little, watching these shows. And it just, the connection there is so, it's so thick and so complex, so interesting, that I find, who would have thought that Westerns were a family affair? And that's exactly what they were. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, we're almost out of time, but I did want to share, somebody commented, Rebecca Butcher commented that she just loved the discussion about the mustaches, as did I. I always find that fascinating about the mustache. And again, it goes into that, Turkey combining their own history and cultural affairs with Western history. And because I think one of the biggest identifiers of Wyatt Earp or whatever is the big giant mustache.
Yeah, I too love that I love that discussion also. I had some difficulty, actually. I'm so, when that scene happens where they slice off Lemmy's mustache, I was like, what? Yep. Whoa, wait a second, something's happening here, right? And I made it, I had to explore. I was like, there's got to be a lot of scholarship on facial hair. And so I was able to find quite a bit, and it was so enlightening. And I want to expand on that as well. So I'm glad that you liked it.
Yes. I think we all did. I think it's fascinating. So I want to thank you for taking time out of your evening to join us. I know that getting this time period and everything was a little bit difficult, but your work really is just absolutely fascinating. And I can't wait for this issue to come out, and you all are going to love it. And please keep track of our website and everything, and follow along with us, because you're going to want to see these amazing images that Kara has, and just a well-written, fascinating article. And feel free to watch this recording. It'll be posted in next week. And Kara, thank you so much for lending your expertise, your research, your time, everything with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you so
Yes,
much. Everybody be safe. Have a great time, and join us after Thanksgiving for our last Ask the Author series. Take care.